News that the PGA Tour will merge with LIV Golf shocked the golf community. The two organizations spent the past year in a very public feud. The pivot from friends to foes is truly a 180. Well, tour players were offered astronomical sums of cash to sign on with LIV, dwarfing the earnings some of them may make in an entire career. The PGA Tour accusing LIV of leveraging the game of golf to, quote, sports wash the recent history of Saudi atrocities. Now, LIV golfers were also barred from participating in tour events. LIV players fired back at the PGA with an antitrust lawsuit. As we follow this story here, with that disruption and distraction, as the PGA calls it, it's now behind them. Pending litigation has been put to bed, and the two leagues will apparently move forward as one. Now, there's a lot still up in the air. I mean, what will become of staunch LIV oppositionists who turned down eye-watering payouts to stay loyal to the PGA Tour? Where will these matches be broadcast, and why is Saudi Arabia so interested in the game of golf? Our Brad Smith, Akiko Fujita, Ali Kanal and Josh Schaefer are here now to rummage through all of this mess. Brad.
Yeah, thanks so much, Rochelle. Well, we're not going to really dilly-dally here out of the gate. There's kind of four main ways that we wanted to look at this. And, of course, kind of bringing it back into the business perspective, of course, there is the reaction from the broadcasters that already had deals with the PGA. There is the tax status that the PGA had that had been called into question and really pushed forward some of that litigation as well on the legal front. And there's the player reactions as well, plus, of course, sport washing claims and allegations that have come forward, especially considering where the money from LIV is coming from in the Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund as well and PIF. And so all of that considered, you know, it's interesting where we should start off this conversation, because if we follow the money and start there, Akiko, and I know you've been looking at where particularly that funding has come in from and what the history of some of the funding from Saudi Arabia has looked like, even into some U.S. entities and other sports leagues before, too.
Yeah, you know, I've been looking at this from the Saudi perspective, and the first thing I thought of when this came out was sort of the Vision 2030 that was laid out in 2016. Yeah. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman saying that, look, we're going to try to diversify the Saudi economy away from oil. I was looking at the budget right now. We're talking about more than 70%, roughly 80% of the budget still comes from oil exports. They have been trying to push to diversify in other areas, bring investments domestically. That hasn't necessarily worked. And we've already seen this kind of in the tech sector we should say buying their influence, but investing in these tech companies, whether it's Uber, whether it's Lucid. The Sovereign Wealth Fund has been putting a lot of money there. What's interesting to me about this story is that, yes, it's been happening on the tech side. On the sports side, a lot of that has been abroad. And this sort of brings it all back home here in the U.S. when you talk about really getting that stake in golf.
And they sort of found a good loophole when you think about the PGA and you think about golf as an overall sport, right? Because you can lure big players away and almost make the PGA worthless without actually buying the PGA, right? When you buy Uber, you have to buy shares of Uber, and eventually you would have to actually be approved to buy the whole thing, right? And shareholders would have to vote for that. Shareholders in the PGA, I guess we could call them the players, don't really have to vote at least all in one. You take a couple big name players and you really start devaluing what the PGA has. And I think it was sort of a smart, savvy business play when you think about, I think my read from this from the beginning was LIV Golf was never actually going to be a league. The Saudi Public Investment Fund wanted to get into American sports and they wanted to get into the sport of golf. And they successfully did that with this investment.
Yeah, and you have to feel for the players that rejected those LIV Golf contracts, $100 million reportedly for the sanctity of the game, to be loyal to the PGA. And now you have this merger, and no one really knows what this is going to look like. There are little details right now. And even on the broadcast side, you were mentioning some of those deals. I mean, the PGA contracts, they currently last through 2030 with ESPN, NBC, CBS. They're worth more than $700 million in domestic TV and streaming rights annually. And this is something that LIV Golf really needed. They needed a domestic deal. They were able to strike a multi-year partnership with the CW. But that was an odd network choice as well, because it skews younger female demographic with shows like Riverdale, The Flash, Supergirl. Your target audience for golf isn't necessarily going to the CW. And then on top of that, you had really struggling ratings for those broadcasts on the CW. That Mexico season opener in February, just over 500,000. And then we saw a 24% drop in their second event in Tucson. If you compare that to the PGA, its latest event, the Memorial Tournament, saw over 3 million viewers tune in to that final round on CBS. So there's a big discrepancy there as well.
So you point to, why so many players were outspoken against LIV Golf. And I think it's worth mentioning why, because that sort of puts all of this in perspective, it's not just about the sport. When you talked about the sanctity, it is about what Saudi Arabia has been alleged in terms of atrocities. It's about the war being waged in Yemen. It's about the murder of Washington Post columnist Jamal Khashoggi. I mean, there are so many issues. Remember, 9/11 families came out and said, look, Saudis were behind the attacks here. And now you've got a massive sovereign wealth fund, the money there coming from the kingdom directly, having a stake in it. And you have to wonder what this means because, Josh, I know you've been looking into this too, but are they going to go for another sport now like the NBA? And are the...
Yeah, no, I mean, they could. So the reason we highlight the NBA, too, is because the NBA has said that they will accept money from sovereign wealth funds. Now, Adam Silver has actually asked directly about this recently. The NBA finals are ongoing right now, so the commissioner is being interviewed quite frequently. And he said they haven't directly seen investment from the Saudis yet or seen interest yet, but sort of tiptoed around, well, they invest in a lot of other things and think about the World Cup in Qatar, and people sort of eventually overlook these things. And I think that's kind of the lesson here, Brad, is we talk about the atrocities, but at the end of the day, these things keep happening, right? We keep seeing these investments, and really what can we do when people eventually just want to take the highest bidder, right? They want to take that money.
And for anybody who's tracked the world of golf, Saudi Aramco already had a series on the women's side for the better part of 2-3 years now. They've been able to move that forward. And so that's kind of going with what you're saying, and people just looking past it saying, well, yeah, women's golf needed more money anyway. Why not allow them to make this investment? And if we're coming back to Jay Monahan and a lot of the decision making in the dollars that went forward around this is, whether we want to call this the best or worst business decision or executive decision he's going to make, time will tell on that. But what we do know about him right now, in the messaging that he moved away from, it was hypocritical to what they were putting out there in rebuke of what Saudi Arabia was doing with launching LIV Golf and the funding that they were putting towards it and the $800 million sums that they were willing to offer reportedly to Tiger Woods and other major players as well.
PGA needed money, right?
Right.
The PGA mainly operates as a nonprofit. They were pulling a lot of money and a lot of funds to try and get more money into these tournaments. You think the Memorial Tournament a couple weeks ago, they paid, I think, $3 million to the winner. That winner used to get $1.5 million. They were boosting these prize money pots so people would stay in the PGA and not go to LIV. That's not a sustainable model when you're not, this isn't the NFL. We're not talking about billionaires that own teams and are funding the league. That's why the PGA was such a smart play for the Saudis. There is not billionaire money involved in this league.
And not just the money angle too, right? But also the international exposure, because we've seen the domestic viewership steadily be on the decline for the PGA. They've struggled with viewership. The final round of the PGA Championship in May was the lowest total since 2008, 4.52 million, down 14% year over year. And the first final round since 2019, where it did not reach 5 million viewers. So you have to wonder if there is this lack of relevancy in golf as a whole. I know, Brad, that you picked up on that because you're a big golfer. But it's an older demographic. There's a lack of diversity. It's very expensive. There's a lot of barriers to entry. Exactly. And LIV, it seemed like, wanted to really appeal to the Gen Z of it all and make it more exciting and just crack the mold, I guess, of what we traditionally think of.
But is it really about that, or does it just come down to money, like you said? Because we know the Saudis have a lot of money, right? And I wonder where is this just about golf, or do they pursue other sports? And if that's the case, where does that comfort level lie? I mean, I'm sort of looking at this from a geopolitical prism, right? If it is PGA and LIV, sure, we don't expect regulators potentially to step in. It's golf. If it moves into the NBA, if it moves into the major leagues, does that point bring in lawmakers who say, wait a second, let's maybe put some guardrails up for what that foreign investment should look like? We've already seen that in the tech space. Is sports a big enough thing for this to become broader beyond the sports conversation? Is it going to bring in regulators? Is it going to bring in lawmakers to say, we don't want that much Saudi influence here?
Yeah, I'm not even going to give credence to the argument of whether or not golf is a sport. I would say yes.
Well, it is a sport, yes, of course, but is it big enough?
Exactly. And at the same time, even as we think about the gatekeepers of golf, they have almost been the worst detriment to golf and the growth of the sport, I'll call it, and the fact that you've had leadership sit idle for so long and allow for a totally new league, and not just one, but 2 or 3 other leagues around the world internationally be able to get legs and be able to get viewership and slowly siphon off, to your point, some of that viewership that the PGA could have gotten if they would have become more innovative, if they would have listened to the fans saying, you know what, we want more events like Waste Management Open. You know what, from the fans and the players, we want more of the ability to just not have these stringent rules that loom over the game to make it so that it's not fun. Nobody wants to engage either as a fan or a viewer or a player in a sport that they say, so what can I do? How can I get to the goal line? How can I make sure that I get the ball in the cup at the end of the day when there's so many rules? That's what their issue has been for a while as well.
That's why I think both sides sort of conceded here, right? In the sense of LIV didn't succeed. We were saying that they got a streaming deal with the CW, but really they didn't want a streaming deal with the CW, right? That's a loss. They couldn't find a real streaming partner that was actually willing to pair up with them at a high level, a big streamer that we talk about and cover here, like an ESPN or something like that. They were never going to get that. No. But then PGA also sort of admits LIV had good ideas. Not only did they have money, but maybe the guys can wear shorts. Who really cares if they're wearing shorts? Who really cares if they ride karts? I think people would love if the PGA allowed karts, because then the most popular player in the PGA would be playing weekly right now, Tiger Woods, who can't walk in between holes.
Well, you went to one of the LIV Golf events, one of the earliest ones in the U.S.
And some of the people, I went last July out in Bedminster.
Was it fun? Was it like Waste Management?
It was golf but louder, as they said, because they played music the whole time.
And that's like the only thing I know to refer to.
So let's take the source of the money aside.
Yeah.
Ultimately, is this good for the sport? And then does it matter if the money comes from the Saudis? I mean, let's talk about golf itself.
Well, it removes a headache here, and you've seen that in the stock price reaction as well. I was taking a look at Topgolf Callaway, and that is up 5.5% just since this deal was announced, just over the course of this week. You've also got Titleist owner Acushnet. That was up by about 5.8% this week. So there's clear reaction in the manufacturers of the equipment in golf, knowing that there's this overhang that, man, we don't have to worry about that anymore. Now we just have to figure out, okay, for our players that are going to be in this newly merged league, how we support them and continue to support them best.
Do you think LIV Golf can make a star out of some of these players? Because that, to me, is the biggest issue. Tiger Woods, obviously, but he's getting older. I feel like golf doesn't have a go-to star that can really drive people.
But is that the PGA LIV's fault, or is it about finding a rising star?
I would blame the PGA. I would definitely blame the PGA for not compensating players at the level that they could have been, when you can have and create stars that way, right? And sort of create by paying players more to show up at events, and paying players more to play more, and paying players more that play well. So understanding that they're the people that are driving ratings, it was a big argument from players throughout the years that saying, basically Phil Mickelson said, when I show up to a tournament, that's why butts are in seats. I should get more money. And the PGA never really did that until LIV pushed them to do that.
He's old too.
Well, he is.
Younger players.
But he played well at the Masters. We'll give him that. Hang on, just 1 second here, because I think there is, and we didn't get to play the clip from Rory McIlroy, but if there's one player that has emerged as perhaps the new face of golf, for better or for worse, because now there's going to be a conversation around him all the time. And I think we do have the clip, so we'll run in a hot second. But Rory was the poster child for the PGA's claims against LIV. And now this deal comes forward. Here's what he had to say right after that deal was announced.
I see what's happened in other sports. I see what's happened in other businesses. And honestly, I've just resigned myself to the fact that this is, this is what's going to happen. Like, it's very hard to keep up with people that have more money than anyone else. And again, if they want to put that money into the game of golf, then why don't we partner with them and make sure that it's done in the right way?
So the money spoke to Jay Monahan, and Jay Monahan didn't speak to Rory, even though he was pushing him out there throughout much of all last season, the season prior, and Tiger Woods bringing in all of these people to make sure that they were pushing the PGA higher, but at the same rate. At the end of the day, it just comes back to this deal.
Money talks.
Money talks.
Yeah, that's the big takeaway.
That's the business lesson here, right? You're never really going to win. Your boss can do whatever they want. They can go and make a deal behind your back. People are going to chase the money. You can try to not chase the money if you want to, but at the end of the day, someone will chase that money. Someone is going to get that money. So if you want it, you should go get it.
And be a part of the conversation? I mean, is that kind of what it comes down to?
Right. You probably would have had a seat at the table, right? It seems like Phil Mickelson at least alluded to he had an idea that it was coming.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, guys, we got to wrap things here right now. Thanks so much for joining us for this conversation. PGA and LIV Golf, they are going to be a newly formed unit here. That merger announced this week, and a lot more following the money that we'll be doing from the Yahoo Finance perspective. Thanks so much, guys. Rounding out this panel, Kiko Fujita, Ali Kanau, Josh Schaefer.